Share my screen. Got that pearl yet?
Yeah, Steve, I'll send it to you.
Just right up here, so you just have a seat and we'll just pizza. Other yummies up here.
Perfect. Let's see. What I will do is I can share your screen and your stuff. So you can
You
display
haven't
from
pitched
there.
in my out. You might be able to do the cord up to here. We'll just slide up a little bit. And if you have one, if not, then we can broadcast to another room.
Maybe I could just.
Well, as presenters, it's a little awkward to be talking to people from behind. You know what I mean?
That means nobody's looking at me. That's kind of nice.
Whatever you want to do, man. This is your show, so.
There we go. So it's currently sharing your desktop right now.
Is it?
Is that one of your desktops?
Uh-uh.
Okay.
Whatever he wants to do, there ought to be something.
I will.
Well, yeah.
Caption?
There he is. It's just a microphone.
Oh. I don't have anything planned off of this.
You might be okay with your mic there.
That's just a headphone, actually.
It might pick up both. I don't know. It's a Windows machine. I don't do Windows anymore.
Let's see over here. Screen share. Are you good if you're just entire screen?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It kind of goes into an infinite loop until you go to something else. Like that.
Cool. Can you see me okay on that?
Yep.
Awesome. I'll skip this. This is just a microphone. It's not just the.
But yeah, no, that plugs into
This.
is the in to there. So I think for those, they'll pick up both the headphones and the microphone. Maybe. We'll give it a shot.
Test. Test. Can you hear me?
I have to change your. Let's try.
I
with
might just
your-
pick the microphone off of the laptop.
Yeah,
Might be what we're.
we'll test that and
Are
see.
you going to display?
I can.
Okay. So
That's the deal.
whatever you're showing here, then he can just show it there.
Okay. Let me just switch to a different screen. Does that show that screen or does it show the previous? Cool.
I emailed you the link.
Just
Is anybody going to,
how many guys are new to JavaScript? New. All right. How would you guys say maybe 3 years experience, 5 years experience? Okay. So originally, Dan was asking me to speak on closure or scope and this keyword. So there's a lot of confusion around all of that with JavaScript, and scope works different from Java or C#. A lot different. Are you guys? What's that? Go ahead. No worries.
yeah, we're not broadcasting.
Oh, okay.
Just, yeah, we got like 5 minutes, so
Oh, okay.
that's cool.
No.
Sounds very good, but.
Oh.
We've got a couple of people joining still.
I don't have to do one of those. So is it like a scheduled thing right at 12 it will start?
Yeah, usually you start late.
Well, that's good. Oh, I got the hiccup. Keyboard.
What do you need?
This might work, but I don't know.
Hey, come in.
Yeah.
A couple things we've found in the past is you can make font sizes bigger
Mhm.
and then we'll ask questions, just kind of repeat them so people streaming can hear.
Okay, I'm thinking that my microphone on here is picking it up. I don't think this is doing it. Yeah,
There's,
yeah, it's not this.
okay. I guess, yeah, that's gonna work, and we'll just do that. It'll just be kind of tethered.
Okay, that's cool. All right, looks like we hit 12 o'clock. Are we running?
Let's give it like 2 more seconds. You still have church right now? Where are you at?
Well, today's technically my last day.
Oh yeah. You have anything lined up yet?
There's kind of a few things have sprung up, so.
Yeah. Sweet. That'll be good. Yeah, down there on 28.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Be nice. It's a little better.
Oh, cool. 28th, yeah, that's coming up soon.
Okay, we're getting ahead.
Spray your engine out a little bit.
All right, cool. I think we will get started. So thanks for coming again. This is number 4 in our 6-part JavaScript series. Today we'll have Richard Terrell presenting for us. He's one of our JavaScript guru consultants. And how long have you been at the company now, Richard?
5 years?
5 years, yeah. So he's been around the block. And if you guys have any questions or whatever, just feel free to shout them out or come see us afterwards. So.
Okay, sorry. Get out ahead.
I'm not sure what the.
Sorry.
This way?
We put the chair in. Perfect, yeah, sorry. We'll just all process. It's not my fault.
Let's do. Thought there was a way to.
This is how we make everybody have a seizure or puke while you're eating your pizza.
You can blame that on me too. I'll clean it up. But you can blame
All right, so I was just planning on coding a few examples. I've got a little bit of an itinerary, and I don't know, we'll see what happens. Might be pretty interesting. Might be a roller coaster here.
And I can't
Trying to get this.
Project version of today's presentation.
It's going to be about as good as we can get. Font size, maybe?
Yeah, I was trying to find that shortcut key, but
Okay, and
that should have been me, but I'm not.
No, just search for font at that top there.
Sure, it shows up under there, but.
Control plus and control minus.
colors and fonts. Down, down, down. Left, down, down.
Right here. General
Font.
colors and fonts.
One more.
Right there, font right below it. There we go.
Yeah, there's usually a way to just tell it to use the mouse wheel. It's not liking that.
Save it as a profile before to let you guys go back to that one.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. They must have changed some things here. Anyways.
You're saying you have to save this profile? Yeah. There you go.
You guys see that okay back there? Is it? All right.
Very first line is off the page.
All right. So I'm just going to make a document that we can play with here. So what I'd like to do is talk about scope. So JavaScript has global scope, and it's got local scope, and it's got closure scope. Anybody familiar with it already? Know all of those pretty well? Okay. So global scope, okay, well, most of us have programmed JavaScript in a web browser. Have any of you guys used Node.js? Raise your hand so I can kind of get an idea. Okay, cool. So there's global scope in the web browser, and usually what that means is that's the window object. So if you just type window, you've got all of the what are called, there's native objects and there's host objects. And this is a little deceiving because it says native code. However, these are objects that are built into the browser. They come with it. And then if you were to look at Node, the global object in Node is a little bit different. It's got all kinds of operating system specific stuff. But the same thing applies. There's global scope, and when you go to, yeah, what's your question?
What is the relationship between those two global spaces? Does the window hold the node, or vice versa? Or are they totally separate?
So it's your global namespace. It's like your root scope. Scope is a place to hold variables and state information.
So are those both in that as at the same level, their peers?
Mhm.
So one doesn't hold the other.
Yeah, Windows on your browser, Node is on the server, so that's how they're
Oh,
separated.
that's where I'm just ignorant. Okay.
Let me,
They're the same concept. Since you don't have a window on your server, it's global scope on Node.
and yeah, so this is the equivalent. I mean, it's got an object that contains lots of sub-objects and things that you can use to code with.
You're saying those are in global scope?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All the time.
Yeah, and so you want to be very careful with what you're putting into your global scope. You don't want to just litter it with everything. So you notice that I use the word this in Node. Let me hide that. So the keyword this can mean one of two things. And it depends on the execution context. What that means is there's a global execution context, and that's what I'm using this as. Now, if you're familiar with Java or C#, this usually refers to the current object, right? You guys are familiar with that concept. Same thing applies in JavaScript, but you've got both versions. So if I just declare a variable here, let's print that out. It prints out 9, but what I want to do is put a breakpoint. You guys familiar with Chrome debug or developer tools? Like them? It's cool stuff. I like it. What's that? I missed out.
BrownBags ago, yeah.
So the developer tools show you your scope, and you'll notice that under scope, it only has global here. So again, we can look at all the global objects within here. And if I scroll down to where the lowercase letters start, there's our variable. That all makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This is what's available in the browser?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This is on Chrome. Firefox has their version of it. I need to learn a little bit more about Firefox's version. You're referring to the developer tools or
No, the
global scope? Yes, absolutely. So in the tool here, over on the right, you've got scope, and under that, it'll show you your different types of scopes. So
You have to be in that mode to be able to see this code. You have to go.
breakpoint, yes, exactly. Before I put that breakpoint in there, you'll notice that the debugger isn't really active. It doesn't show them anything. So now I'll show you local scope. Oops. So now we can see the debugger is stopped inside the init function. The init function is declared inside the global scope, the root scope, global namespace. It's all kind of the same thing. So I've stopped here, and you can see that I've got two types of scopes, local and global. And you can see that my variable is undefined here, even though I'm before my declaration here. Does anybody know why that might be?
Hasn't been through it yet.
Not exactly.
JavaScript always takes all of the variables and initializes
Yes.
at the beginning.
Yes. It's called declaration hoisting. So, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but and I'm not going to.
It's undefined why?
Because, well, I haven't executed this line yet.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was thinking.
Okay, so let me just change this a little bit so I can put a statement there. So now that it's executed that, it's declared it and it's initialized it. Okay, so I mentioned declaration hoisting. It does not hoist the initialization. So that's why it was undefined when I first came in here. It hoisted the variable declaration, so it's as if it put it like that. That's what it does behind the scenes. And this can introduce some bugs into your code if you're not aware of how this works. So
So you're saying as soon as it gets into this method, all the local variables are declared?
yeah, yes, they're set to undefined. Now, okay, so the scope that's created is within this block of code here. It's the function. Anything inside here would be your local scope.
Okay. In any function, right? Anything within a function is going to be right?
Exactly.
So if you define another function, you're going to get another local.
Depends on where I put it. So let's say we put something in here like a timeout. So window set timeout. So I'm going to declare a function. This is an anonymous function, and we could actually give it a name if we want, but we don't need to. And so this leads us into closure scope. Oops. So now you'll notice there's a closure scope over here. Okay, the reason why you have closure scope is because of garbage collection. You've declared this variable up here, and JavaScript runtime is going to keep that variable around as long as it's in use. And down here on line 8, I'm using it. If I take that line out, watch what happens. I no longer have a closure scope. Disappears. Garbage collection has actually already happened at that point. It doesn't need variable B or any variables that I put up here.
Garbage collection had happened the line after without the in. Okay,
so the reason why I did set timeout is because this will happen asynchronously. JavaScript is an event-based system, so everything is triggered by events. This timeout, I didn't give it an exact timeout here. I could give it 3 seconds. Oops. Put it in the right spot here. Three seconds later, it triggers that code. And so it had already gotten rid of the closure for this right here, unless we put it back in here and we use it.
And is the closure because you have B declared outside of the function?
Yeah, so it's a inner function. It'll have access to both global scope. Let me see. There we go. It's going to have access to global scope, local scope, and the closure, meaning this up here. The function that the function that contains this inner function.
Okay.
Also, the function that contains the inner function is the closure. Not the, okay.
So when JavaScript runs this function, it declares a space in memory to hold these variables, and that's your closure. And it's smart enough to know when to get rid of that for garbage collection. And if there's any references, like on line 8, it's going to keep that around. Let's see what happens if I give it a let's take that timeout out. So let's get rid of C. So we're not going to be intending on using it. It got rid of C for us. It garbage collected it, that part of the closure. Is everybody following along? Cool, cool.
Garbage collected C.
Yeah, because it doesn't need it anymore. There's no more references.
Hit window. Nope.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I declared C equal to 2 and moved to the line 7.
Mm-hmm.
Has C been garbage collected by the time I get to line 7?
No. So if we put a breakpoint there, it's C is still in memory, and we can step over this. It's not going to execute our inner function there until the timeout happens. So that's the next cycle of the code, the life cycle of JavaScript. So if I hit play, it then hits there. And that variable C has been garbage collected.
Oh.
So
All right,
it's
that's
basically, so you've got what you meant by an events-driven system. It's essentially, not exactly, just a big event loop, and it goes down and pops off the next thing to do off of that
Yes.
queue. And when you do Windows set timeout, it sets that function as the next thing in the queue. So
Yeah.
it goes and
Yeah, so it doesn't essentially multi-thread it,
Richard,
it just,
if you actually set the value, you can time out so you can see how it plays.
Yeah, let me put that. Let's put in,
very enough.
let's do 5. And didn't get my code. So it hasn't started counting the 5 seconds yet until I actually, right. But since I'm sitting here in the debugger, it's not going to trigger that event. I could wait 5 minutes and until I hit play. Okay, so it's actually when, as soon as I left that init function, that's when it, yeah. Okay, so let me do, and miss anything in here? Execution context. Oh, okay, so let me go back to the keyword this. So let me just blow this away.
Are you in Node.js here?
No, this is IntelliJ.
And Node always runs on the server, is that correct?
It can run on desktop, server.
That's for the server, is that right?
I would say it's not just for the server. You can use it in a lot of places. Like I've used it to do my front end build. So I have a Java Spring Framework project, and Maven triggers the build, and it combines like all the CSS,
Like
JavaScript. What's that?
It's like Grunt.
Grunt, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you can.
You're using that as a developer tool, not in the finished product.
Right.
It's not good.
Mhm.
There are people who use, as their server side.
Exactly.
It's in production.
Yep. And I've worked on a project with STG using Node on the back end.
Just an execution environment. It's like a browser without the browser.
Mm-hmm. You can connect to databases. There's a lot of things you can do with it. Mhm. Okay, so I told it to print out the word this. And because this function was declared within the global, or I'm executing it from within the global context, execution context, this refers to the global object, the window object for web browsers. Now,
I thought you were inside a function here.
yes.
You're inside the init function, sorry.
Yeah, and I'm triggering it over here.
And your init right there, your init call is in the global space, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so init is declared, if I were looking here, I would see my init function inside this global thing down here, the lowercase init. There's my init function. So now Now what I want to show you is different execution context. So it's either global or object-based execution context. So I'm going to create an object here, just an empty object, and I'm going to set test equal to init. So JavaScript is similar to C in everything's a variable, functions or variables. So you can use init as a variable. I'm assigning it to the test property of my B object.
And is that mapping to the init function?
Yeah, so when I call test, it's going to call init. Now here's where it gets a little weird.
Oh, no, JavaScript.
It's weird. It gets weird and awesome at the same time. And
Especially if you've been thinking Java for a lot of years.
yes, for me it's a love-hate relationship. I spend most of my time hating it, and
Every once in a while you love it.
yes. Oops. All right, so now watch what happens. So I told it to, let me bring up source. I told it to call test first and then init. You can see that when it printed this keyword out, it's two different things. And it's only going to be two different things. It's going to be the object that it's referring to or the global namespace. I'm calling it twice. All right.
So when you call it in the context of it being embedded
In an object.
in the object, this means the object.
Yes. And so this is JavaScript as it's been for years and years. Now, you've probably heard the word ECMAScript. JavaScript is technically called ECMAScript. That's the real name for it. There's different versions of it, and ECMAScript 6 it's on its way out to browsers. If you look at there's an ECMAScript 6 compatibility chart for web browsers, and they're lagging behind. And in my opinion, this is why AngularJS 2 hasn't caught on, because AngularJS 2 is built on ECMAScript 6. And there's some really cool things, a lot of performance improvements with it. So there's a lot of things to take advantage of. And depending on time, I'd like to go into some of those. Prototypes. Okay, so the way you can do inheritance in JavaScript. Sorry, do you have a question?
So you can only have global, local, and closure scope
Correct.
in the JavaScript file separation?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it always depends on the execution context.
Yeah, however you're writing your code.
Uh-huh.
You probably won't, or you're always going to have a global scope.
Yes.
You're likely going to have a local scope because you're going to have functions.
Yes.
Okay, you may or may not have closure scope then, right? Just depend on the
If you're doing jQuery, you're dealing with it all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, you can have nested levels of closures.
Oh, okay.
So, a closure you could call another function. It's a local and, so it's the parent's local scope becomes the closure scope for, functions declared in there. Okay, so.
Closure scope means something.
Yeah, closure scope is just the context of what called it. So around it, you declare a function in there, and when it's executed, it'll have the closure scope around it.
Yeah.
Where it's declared, as well as the execution context. That's the difference between scope and context. There's what's surrounding it, and then it's what it's attached to. And that's what this is, what it's attached to. The closure or the scope is what is around it when it was declared. See the wheels turning.
Yeah.
You just let out your nose a little bit.
Yeah.
One function within another, you necessarily have a closure.
You will have.
Yeah.
You will have a closure, and if there's any objects inside of it that are referenced in the inner function,
Right.
it's going to keep that closure around. Otherwise, it's going to garbage collect.
Okay, yeah. If you have a variable, like you have the B declared above an inner function, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't have the B that was referenced within an inner function, would you have a closure?
You would have a closure, but it would get rid of it immediately.
Yeah, after it executed,
Mhm.
yeah, okay.
Yes.
If you have to be outside, you're gonna have that closure will remain in scope.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. It's a little confusing, and there's a lot of bugs that can come out of all this.
But what did you mean by context?
So the execution context, that's what he's explaining. This is the execution context.
Okay.
So you have access through this
It's
to all the things that are associated with B. Right?
Okay.
so I'm calling an it here from a global execution context, and here I'm calling it from an object execution context, and that object is B.
Okay, good.
Mhm. Now, so a lot of people, like especially with jQuery code, well, all right, so 80% of my time when I'm hating JavaScript, that was usually when I was doing jQuery. Now, I don't mind it so much. I'm spending 80% of my time loving it and life in general. So, and I love Angular.
But does
Absolutely.
Angular replace, not necessarily replace, but you can, whatever you could have done in jQuery and JavaScript, you can now do in Angular, is that right?
Yes, yeah, Angular's built on top of JavaScript. And there's going to be some big changes with Angular 2. I don't know, have you guys spent time with Angular 2? A little bit? They're getting rid of the scope variable. You know how you inject
You can already
scope?
get rid of it essentially in version 1 by using the controller as syntax.
Mhm. Well, it still uses scope.
It's still there, but
Uh-huh.
you really go a long way to getting around having to.
Yeah.
That's caused lots of problems.
Is anybody not familiar with AngularJS? A couple of you, 3 of you. There's some really cool features about AngularJS, and some of it just appears to be magic. But there's some overhead behind the scenes. So I won't get too much into AngularJS, but what I wanted to talk about was observe. So observe is an ECMAScript 6 function here, and luckily it's in Chrome here, so I can see it by going to object.observe. That function is available in this browser. It's not available in all browsers, because it's new. Browsers are adopting it. What I can do with observe is pretty sweet. Okay. I'm going to put a breakpoint there, and I'm going to run this code. And I'm going to trigger it down here. So what's happened is I've declared the variable brains on the global scope. Well, this doesn't have anything to do with scope, so I'm going to observe any changes on my variable here. And changes comes in as an array, and it's an array of objects that have a type, name, old value, some other stuff. And I'm going to trigger my init function. So I'm adding an A property because it's an empty object right now. I'm adding an A property to it and setting it to 2. I'm creating a B property. It's an array, pushing something on it. I delete A. Now what happens here? So now this is high performant. Well, considerably high performant. Better than AngularJS as far as monitoring what's happening on your scope. So on my object, it told me that I've added the variable A, and it was previously undefined. Let's do a little bit more here. What was that? All right. Let's change, just so you can see what's going on here. Well, I don't even need to run that function. I can just do it right here. So I've got this this listener listening to changes, so I can make some changes and have it just give me immediate feedback. I've added the variable A. If I change it to something else, it's telling me that I've updated A. If I delete A,
Essentially a washer?
yes, and it's executing within the browser code, not necessarily inside the JavaScript runtime. So it's a lot faster. It's probably happening inside C++ or something. So huge benefits. AngularJS, it does this by every time the lifecycle changes, it looks and sees what variables have changed. It goes and analyzes every variable on there. Has this changed? Has it been deleted? Yeah, but as you guys have used AngularJS, it's pretty quick. It's until you start getting huge pages with lots of little things moving, lots of moving parts. You'll see some performance hits.
There was built into JavaScript things?
ECMAScript 6. So I would say that Firefox has most of the ECMAScript 6 features. If you get the Firefox Nightly version, you're going to be far ahead of what's their production version, their release. I was going to show you bind, not let, but okay. So this goes back to the the execution context of the global this versus the object this. ECMAScript 6 added some new features to handle this, and it's called bind. What I can do is, okay, so what did I do here? Declared a global variable X and then a global variable object A that contains its own version of X and a function that prints this.x. So when I call a.doit, prints out 32. Now, if I create a global reference to that object, watch what happens. Prints out 19, because this is referring to the global object. This is how you can introduce some bugs into your code, and I've done it a lot, and sometimes I don't recognize it immediately, but
Can you go over that one more time?
sure. Absolutely.
I suspect I'm not the only one.
Yeah, I'm glad somebody else asked that question.
But I mean, by all means, if I'm not explaining it right, and I'm not great at explaining things, so
No,
let me give it another
something
try.
takes a little while to sink in through the
Sure. Okay, so we're talking about global execution. Execution context. Global versus object. So if I rerun this.
The variable equal 19 there.
Yep.
And inside of A,
You also have an X.
Yeah.
equal 32.
So the first thing I would say is stop mixing your names up.
Yes, that would help. Just because you can do it.
Things you name in the global scope versus inside of an object.
Oh, you know what? I actually missed something on local scope. I'll get back to that after this example. But so I'm executing this do it function from the execution context of the A object.
I see.
Okay.
You got a function in A called do it.
Mhm.
That's what you call it, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So when I execute that, it prints out 32. Just to clear that, you don't have a lot of space.
Yep.
Now, if I assign, it's basically like a pointer. This F is a pointer to the do it function. And since that F resides in the global namespace, it's executing that within the global execution context.
Oh, that makes no sense whatsoever.
Go ahead.
What if you don't have X defined in global context and you go?
Good question. Put that out. What would you say would happen? What was I at?
It should fail, but it's not good.
Yes, it might be able to fall back to the, well, I don't know.
Okay, which one was I getting rid of?
That one.
This one here? All right. So I'm going to call do it, and 32 comes out because that was the object execution context. And then here, does that make sense?
You had X equals to 19 globally,
Mm-hmm.
and then you had X equals 32 locally.
Inside of the A object.
Right, okay, so they didn't pronounce what's called F, and you still had X there. Then what would happen if you named, where X equals 32, just named it to Y?
Change this to Y.
Yeah.
It'll be the exact opposite. So X is undefined within A, and X is defined in the global.
The execution context is global.
Oh, because you're doing this dot X. I see,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
So are those two different X's or just two?
Yes.
Those are two different X's.
Two different places in memory. Absolutely.
Okay.
Now,
Is that because you have this in the
yes, that's exactly.
right, because of
Yeah, yeah,
this
it's all fine with
refers to the
this.
context
What would happen if you
executed.
printed out X?
Yeah,
Not
just
this
X,
dot
not
X.
this X, just X.
This is what we would all be doing in our,
Yeah.
our own computers. What happens if I do that?
X is defined up here.
Yeah, change line 3 back to X, 3 back to
So when you don't say this, it's not confining it to the current context.
19.
I'm still tripping over F dot bind. What happens with F dot bind?
Oh, we haven't gotten to that yet. We're still trying to understand up here. But
Well, isn't that what's causing it to happen?
no, so I've only gotten it to there, and I've never executed bind.
Oh, all right. The F function call?
Object out of execution.
So if we return X out of that function, then it would be 32.
Right here. Yeah. So, oh wait, I don't want to do it here. I want to do it. So you'll notice that you're right. Thank you. It returned something, but I wasn't doing anything with it. If I was evaluating it inside this console here, then it would return it. Because the console is always it's always evaluating the last object that that you called in your line. So if I do a.do it, prints out 2 19s because it's evaluating the end result of this. If I do bar equals a.do it, not going to evaluate it because I'm just declaring it that ASDF is 19. Okay, so bind. I mean, you guys can see how there's some bugs that can come out of this. You don't know which this you're talking about. And yeah, and so I've created a that variable. Some people, I don't know. Sometimes you're frustrated and you come up with
Demonstrate that, how you can use it in our own. Me, this, that, underscore this, so.
Yeah, so I would do it a lot in jQuery. At the top of the function, like, okay.
How many folks use jQuery in here? So maybe we're going to talk a little bit about proxy data.
Proxy?
I would talk about apply before I talk about jQuery's proxy.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd kind of like to stay away from jQuery a little bit. I didn't.
Well, so
permanently.
Are actually used by proxy. Would you like to throw this down? Basic JavaScript. Apply call. Talk about before.
Yes. Okay. So apply.
Sorry, you want to do the me, self, underscore this. I derailed you.
Yeah, we're okay. So I'll just quickly say bind lets you get around this issue. I can specify that. So this was executing within the global context, this F function. I can actually bind it. So when it calls when I call this function, it's going to bind this variable to my A object. So I can specify.
Now that F that you're addressing there, I'm tripping over the fact that you have a var F and then a function.
Right here?
It's like a function.
This I'm declaring it and initializing it. Here I'm executing it.
What do you execute?
The function F, which is a pointer to do it, which is up here.
When you reference a function without the
parentheses,
yes. If I did that, it wouldn't do anything. It'd give me that variable 19 because it's returning it.
So it's a function because it's referencing a function.
Yeah.
Still thinking Java.
So I'll just go through this right here. So I called F and it returned 19. Well, did I change anything? Okay. Sweet. So now we have both a window.f and a window.boundf.
So you can have either one.
And let's see here. So now when I execute, it's 32 because I specified that I want it to be bound to this. I'm specifying that this object is bound to the A object. So it's a way to get around it, make things a little clearer. Another way of doing it. How much time do we got? 12. Let me just see what else. There's some really cool stuff with binary data. Do you guys want to see that? All right.
I'm a little bit more confused.
Are you familiar with C?
No.
Okay. Maybe I can explain it in terms of JavaScript here. These are some new ECMAScript 6 objects. So let's just put a breakpoint there and run this. All right, so binary objects. If you were to, how many of you have worked with Canvas? Have you worked with it, Canvas on a low level, like?
Drawing to an XY position, drawing a line.
Okay. Before you could work with your Canvas buffer. like you've probably seen Nintendo emulators written in JavaScript. They're doing some pretty advanced stuff by just manipulating the array structures at a low level. Well, this allows you to do it much faster, binary data. So here I'm creating a buffer, an array buffer that's 16 bytes long. So now the way you use this is you create a view into that buffer. I can create a 32-bit integer view into it. There's all kinds of them, like there's some other ones. Chrome hasn't implemented all of them, but we'll see what happens here. So the first 4 elements I'm going to assign, and since we're doing 32-bit, we're using up 4 bytes per element. That's why I've got 4 elements here. And if I print out you can see them. It's just like arrays you're normally used to. Now, I was playing around with this, and it just it didn't blow up when I ran that, which I thought was weird. I don't know why, but I would say that's not a good thing. And it absolutely didn't change my buffer.
Oh no, that's how JavaScript arrays work, right? You can assign something outside of the length.
And it doesn't blow chunks.
Cool.
Undefined times 15.
All right. So.
That's a feature.
That's
yes.
a feature.
Now, I would say that this is definitely a feature up here, because if you're having to do checks on it every time, you're wasting execution cycles, right? I would say it's a performance, but yeah, because it's not checking for you, you definitely want to know what you're doing. Okay, so let's build another view into that same buffer. We'll do a 16-bit. Oops. Why did it do that? Okay, so I've got my 2 views here. I print that out. I'm looking at the same binary buffer, and you'll notice that some of it correlates here. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Anybody know why the zeros are there?
Because the 32-bit array has the extra 4 binary zeros.
Yeah. And why is the 1 first and then the 0? Exactly.
Is anybody doing the Lindian versus this kind of stuff in JavaScript?
People say that JavaScript. Go ahead.
I'm curious, does this open up image processing on the
Absolutely.
side? Because I'm very interested.
Absolutely. Like with Canvas, you got a lower level access to it. Oh.
But could we take a 1000 by 800 image and start making a couple different thumbnails out of it? Are there libraries
You
out
could.
there that will do the Gaussian smoothing as well as high-loading and fine as well?
Yeah. You could algorithmically create graphics. And you could with Canvas previously, but now you can do it faster. So maybe you'll see a Nintendo 64 emulator instead. Really? JavaScript? Oh, okay. All right, so now watch what happens when I change my, let's say the second element here, change it to So int 16 has 4 in the second element. Look what happens to the. So in C, you could work with structures and change parts of memory. I won't talk about C. Yeah.
Are there any accessors that can get to the bit level? Or is it all
You can. And so if you do, what is it? Oh, it's the, you can specify your base. Oh, okay, 5 minutes. Yeah, there is a way, let me think about it. When you're, yeah, let me get back to it. My mind's drawing a blank. Go ahead.
I apologize, but can we go back to scope and this?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if I'm following. So this, but that means the execution context, and that's the caller of a function. Is that what this means?
This, the keyword this can represent one of two things. And yes, it depends on the execution context. If so, you're using, if I'm just using it right here, that is within the global execution context since, yeah, if I put that inside of a function,
This can be undefined.
No.
You'll always get full if you don't have.
So the reason why I said undefined, okay, so it could only mean one of two things, either the global namespace, which is in the web browser, it's your window object, which contains everything. And the other, if I were to create an object here and specify a function to be referencing that one, and I call a dot, it's printing the this keyword out, but now since I'm calling it from this object, that function is executing from that object. It's now referencing a. It says object here, but it's a. Like if I were to add a new property to a, and I call that again, you're going to see I'm dealing with a right there. And if you'd like, I'd be glad to show you more. Talk.
This is the owner.
The owner?
Yeah. Essentially, it's one way of thinking of it.
Yeah.
This is the execution context. What have you attached the function to be executed? And if you don't assign it there, if it's global, it's going to be the global scope, which is
So I think, like you said, this can either going to be a window object, or it's going to be a local object,
or an object.
Yeah.
It's the only two things it can be, correct?
A window object or the object that called it.
It has been assigned as its execution context.
Right, yeah.
And there are different ways of assigning that. Bind was one.
I had some code in here. It's a little messy. I meant to just have it as reference to talk and mess around with it. If you guys want this, I can share it. And by all means, afterwards, if you want to hit me up, email or whatever, I'd be glad to talk to you, explain it, hash it out more. I like talking about JavaScript. I didn't start preparing until last night about 2. I don't know, I love JavaScript and I could talk about it for a while. Any final questions? Go ahead.
Were you going to talk about objects? Because I always feel the need to make an object in JavaScript.
Oh, yeah.
Things start getting hairy.
Yeah, so, yeah, object is object-oriented.
So
I'm with,
You
well,
need the JavaScript object, not going make the JavaScript last.
uh-huh.
You're not like that. I'll talk to you about that.
Were you
Okay.
for the last presentation?
Not the last.
Let's see if we can just slides, because we talked about inheritance, which originally involved object creation.
I could show you inheritance really quick, if you want to see it. Within just like 3 lines of code here. So A, create an object, and if, I'm going to add something. And B, now, let's say we want B to extend A, inherit from A. You can say proto underscore. Thank you.
That's how you do inheritance in JavaScript?
Yeah, so JavaScript scope and objects work off of prototypal inheritance. So like create a, oh wait, can't do that. So barf is created on the global namespace, so I can say this dot barf, or I can say window dot barf. And when I'm executing inside of that function, it creates a child scope. So the global namespace cannot see inside that child scope, but the child scope can see inside the global.
They can see it up the inheritance.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, that's all I have. I'd be glad to talk more later, but thanks for listening.